Welcome to day 3 of LSI Europe 23. I'm thrilled to be joined by Jose Pedro and Dr. Lina Williamson. Let's start with some intros. Lina, one of you.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Lina Williamson. I'm currently the head of entrepreneurship for Hospital Clinic in Barcelona. I'm also part of the MIT Sloan Fellowship for Catalyst. Previously, I was the director of the Translational Accelerator at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Harvard Medical School in Boston. And I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've created about 16 startup companies. I own some of them. And before that, I was at Novartis for 10 years, also doing some science and business development, strategic alliances with academic institutions. So I've been in innovation and entrepreneurship most of my career.
Great, thank you. And Jose Pedro.
Morning, everyone. I'm Chief AI Strategist for several companies nowadays. Also advisory board member for a venture capital in the US, which is Intelligence Ventures, focused on investing in health AI. My previous career, I worked 10 years in the largest hospital group in Portugal, where we've led one of the most globally recognized big data and AI platforms. And afterwards, I was hired by the largest diagnostics group here in Europe, which is called Unilabs, and where I've worked for the CEO in Portugal, leading all their data intelligence transformation, which became an INSEAD case study for their MBAs.
Fantastic. And obviously, a lot of experience on this panel across large corporates, hospitals, in different technology verticals, diagnostics, AI. But let's focus on the hospitals for a moment, because in this audience and at this event, we have a lot of medical technology, health technology companies that talk about how their revenue, their partners are going to come from these large hospitals. But I want to really understand from the inside out, rather than the outside in, what it's like to build a practice in one of these hospitals and get the adoption that they're talking about. So talk to me about the state of affairs at the hospitals that you've worked at when you started, and how you started to build that practice and secure that buy-in to bring emerging technologies into the workflows. And we'll start with Lina.
So in my current hospital right now, the Department of Entrepreneurship did not exist. So I came into the hospital and built the Department of Entrepreneurship. And because of my experience, looking for needs inside and bringing innovation, from the outside in, I started to support the whole hospital transformation, identifying innovation from the outside and bringing it inside, and also evaluating what was going on inside and what needs we would cover. So the organization from the inside, before I was there, it was the Department of Innovation was just a typical technology license office, if you will, but it was not set up for transformation. So now we are a little bit a bigger group. We have identified the needs. We are in the process of identifying the needs because we are a large hospital. We are an 800-bed hospital, and divided in different institutes, and the structure also it's complicated because it's not a typical flat organization. So we are in that process, creating multidisciplinary teams and the whole decision-making process so that we can better validate innovation and implement it in a stream, in an efficient way, instead of like one-off here and there, and then let's see that's how it was before. Let's see what happens. Okay, you bring me an innovation and we figured it out. Now we have a process, so I think that will help.
So on my case, same way as Lina, I've created almost 15 years ago one of the first data and AI departments inside a large hospital. But when I got there, it was really hard. Almost 400 million euros per year annual spending, 1,000 beds, 6,000 employees, 60 departments, 100 different IT systems, 30,000 people coming in and out every day, and I was the youngest director ever there. So I was working with, very senior doctors, like 60 years old and onwards, And what I found out is that you really need to trust is something that takes time to accomplish. And so they need to trust in you, and that process is something that you need to work together and be part of the team, be always available. But at the same time, I must say that if you are going for a transformation like I've led, you need to have some empowerment. And I was speaking to some folks yesterday that are trying to sell to these large hospitals. And then, for instance, they are blocked by the IT of the hospital. So one of the things I've learned throughout my career is, like, in my case, because I lead the transformation from the inside, I always answer the CEO. And that makes a lot of difference because, it opens the doors, and the message is coming from the top down for the IT guy, to allow you to connect the cables and, show your stuff.
I want to follow up on that point about trust. You talk about how important it is, and there are a lot of gaps or rifts maybe between building a new department like this inside a hospital, the types of individuals that may be on that team, and the other individuals, the other stakeholders in that hospital, the executives, the clinicians. How do you position some of these exciting but a little bit black boxy technologies to some of these clinicians when we talk about AI that may automate certain parts of workflows they're very familiar with or parts of procedures that they've been doing for decades? How do you come in as somebody with a different skill set and get that trust? And what type of people do you put on that team around you to support and reinforce the trust that you're trying to garner?
I think the key to that is not to impose, and work with the users. So my way of managing without power, because that's what it is to involve all the different users in the decision-making process. So, it's like in some decades ago when we had electronic medical records that basically were imposed, and the doctors were not asked if they were going to use it because initially it was for, reimbursement. So, they kind of didn't know because it was for administration. As they evolved, they started to be involved, but we don't want to do it in that way. So for me is really getting to know or getting to ask them what they want. So I usually go like, what is your wish? If we had all the resources, how do you envision your department? And I make them talk, and that's how I figured out the needs that they have in the departments. And then who actually uses that? Is that for the nurse? Is that for the patient? Is that for is dashboard? What do you need? So it's just interviewing and extracting information. Once I extract information, then I empower them to be part of it. So all I do is, for example, the last collaboration we did with Amazon Web Services to support our workforce, identifying digital solutions for them. It was exactly that. It was like, okay, what do you need, and then who's going to use it? Okay, come evaluate these opportunities that I have. Do you think that you will use it? And then put them together in a room with the company, and I am out in the company, with the team. And the team is a doctor, nurse, it can be a porter in there. It's like everybody, it's not just the hierarchy, it's flat. Everybody feels empowered, and then they can identify, the company can really see how these people work, and the people who work inside the hospital feel that we are listening. So, and then as they share, then I said, okay, how are you going to pilot it? How are you going to do? So I just guide them, but never, ever impose. And I think that is the way of gaining their trust, is when the final word is from the end user. Of course, when it comes to purchase and everything, it goes up to direction, and the direction will kind of help to decide because the money is managed, centrally. But, at least the first stages of identification are totally empowered by the organization.
So I couldn't agree more with Lina, so I back up everything that she said. I think that, from a more agnostic point of view, doctors and nurses, they don't buy the AI algorithm or, any fancy slide. They buy mostly impact. And for that, I think there are two key issues. One is this one that Lina was telling about. If you have the possibility to build together, so being on the ground with them every day, understanding their most fundamental and clinical issues, that will be key to build the trust. Second thing, I think you cannot ever sell the message like, this product is going to diagnose better than you. That is absolutely the wrong message for two reasons. First is, you'll find an enemy on the other side, which is something that you don't want to. And the second is that you are being quite naive. And the reason being is that, I've worked with doctors for 10 years every day on the ground, and I learned to respect a lot, that magic art that sometimes they have in diagnosing a patient. And so don't sell the product in a naive way like it's going to diagnose better. But to finish my point, I can tell a very short story that resonates with this. So basically, one of the systems we built at that hospital was, sending alerts for patients at risk at scale every day. So sending alerts to to the mobile of each physician, and it could predict 7 days earlier 30% of ICU admissions. And it was, back then, and still today, one of the most advanced systems in the world. But the reason was only young doctors used it. And we tried everything to convince the senior ones, like put posters in the entire hospital, send them emails, go talk to them. It didn't work. You know what worked? What worked was a Friday evening, a text message was sent to a general surgery department doctor that was in charge of 50 beds, signaling that there was a patient with a severe hemoglobin drop. And he was like, nobody told me this. He went to talk with the nursing team. The nursing team told him the patient was fine. He was like, okay, I will see the patient. He went to see the patient, talked to the patient was fine. He asked for another blood sampling. When the other blood sampling came along, the severe drop of hemoglobin was even higher. Patient was taken into the emergency room, and we saved his life. And so that precise moment spread the word of mouth to the entire hospital, and suddenly we had all the senior doctors with us supporting the system. So it takes time, but mostly it takes the impact.
Yeah, proving that case in such a real-world way that's central to what they care about, which again is delivering the best care possible. It's not the slide deck, it's not the creative marketing, it's not the big pushes, it's validated technology that really makes an impact. And so having seen many technologies from the outside in, technologies that you've incubated inside the system, inside out, talk about the process of implementing this now inside. You have your department, you have your team, you have buy-in for this practice. Give us an example of a technology maybe in the hospital in Barcelona that you've implemented that was very successful, and then maybe some more perspective on where companies that are trying to get their technology implemented go wrong in this process of pushing for adoption in the hospital and failing to get the adoption that they need.
I think what comes to mind is probably the technology for surgery proximity. And initially that technology was embedded into another big company technology, so physicians already kind of knew about it, so that was easier for me to bring it in. But then as we brought the whole package of the technology, the first stage was, as I mentioned, make them work together with the users, but also bringing in informatics, bringing in infrastructures, that you don't think about, the engineers, because the surgery room had to be changed. You had to put cameras, and so not only having the doctor, the porter, the nurse, but also having the IT, having all the people who are going to be involved in the process at once in the same table so they can talk about the different aspects. That was a key for us to first getting into a pilot, because we have to pilot. We have to pilot. And I know we have a terminology that is pilotitis, and we don't want pilotitis, we don't want to pilot and pilot and pilot, but pilot something that we really know we are going to implement. But the pilot is just to identify those little parts of the technology that need to be modified so that it can be streamlined, implemented. So once we have identified that, for example, in this case, we realized that when we had 32 surgical rooms that we wanted to transform, but we needed voice recognition. And at the end, they said, okay, if we don't have voice recognition, we do not continue. So we could come back to the company and say, okay, we need that part, and that part was under development. So then that company could actually say, you know what, let's team up and then develop that part, make sure so that we can implement the solution in the way you want it 100%. But they were really flexible in both sides because there was a relationship already established to say, okay, we're going to bring voice recognition and then we're going to go forward. So, and I think that's the key. The key is people to people, is relationships. We do business with people, not with companies at the end. So, make sure all the stakeholders are there, including the ones that you don't think about, like infrastructures, that you usually call later, and then you realize, like, oh, I can modify that. And then working together as a true partnership so that companies that don't have fully developed solutions can actually develop it with us. So I think that's the key for it. You have another example.
So I think the first thing about the team, which is important, is complement the internal resources with external expertise, outside in. I've done the same thing, and it was really valuable. But one key point that I always told that external team was, you need to be inside. You are not building this from the outside. You need to be inside every day, because that makes a real difference. Because, those doctors and nurses that you are going to work for at the end of the day, they will see you there. And just by seeing you there, it's different. You are already part of the team. And I advise any company that is trying to sell to, one of these large organizations to be there, even if it's losing money from the beginning, because it's like a family, You start to be part of the family. So I brought those, external experts in. We built a 560 billion data points platform that could basically answer any question that you can imagine inside the hospital. And when we started helping doctors and nurses with any question, like, how many patients felt yesterday in the 3rd floor with more than 50 years old that are diabetics and live outside the region, like this. And they're like, oh, this is interesting. And then you do this over and over again, and they started coming to you. And they brought us a very serious issue when they started trusting in us, which were hospital-acquired infections. And they were like, we need to isolate patients with these superbugs that are one of the worst global health problems faster. And this to say that time in healthcare, in clinical practice, is really key. If you can reduce time to action, that's really key. So basically, we use that big data platform to alert doctors and nurses when we found one of those superbugs by analyzing the lab results in an automated fashion, figuring out where was the patient at that specific time, and sending the message to the nursing team to isolate that patient. So to give you an idea of the impact this simple thing brought, 2 years later, that same hospital dropped 30% hospital-acquired infections.
Wow.
What that means, at the end of the day, in that specific scenario, was 15 million euros annual savings just with this.
When you talk about the opportunity to bring some of these solutions in, the opportunity to be part of the team, I think one of the things that, having come from the innovator side and thinking about putting myself in the shoes of some of the executives listening, a lot of it might be, that's great, but you got to get in the front door first, right? And you guys have been there looking at solution providers from the outside, and what's the thing that hospitals always want to see is validation, right? You want to see that this works. You want to see that people have used it and done the kinds of things that you want to do. And so you end up in this chicken and egg problem, as we've talked a little bit about earlier in the week. where you need the validation to be able to get it into the hospital, but it's getting into the hospital, it's going to give you this validation in this specific setting. So what's a startup company, an early stage company to do to get that validation, or at least incentivize you to take that chance to be the one to bring that validation for them?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I am actually in both sides, on the seller side with the startup companies that I have, and then
Say
from
more
the
about that.
buyer
Can you
side.
explain a little bit more about how you're on both sides of that equation?
So from the buyer side or from the hospital side, usually we ask the question: are you already implemented in hospitals bigger than 500 beds? And those are kind of the first line innovation that we look at and say, come in, you're already proven, come in. But then when you are on the other side, on the startup side, and you have investors, you got to find your first client. You got to find your first client. And it's so hard to find the first client because that first client is asking you to be already validated. So I've been thinking about it, and I think the solution probably to it is also from the investor standpoint, just give the startup a little bit of a preferred terms that the startup can use to go into the first client. So if the first client has some benefits, I can open the doors to the startups and say, okay, I can help you validate your innovation, but what is in it for me? Can I have maybe a free use the first 6 months, then 50% cut the first year, and then maybe I can end up paying full price after 3 years or something like that. Some sort of negotiations with the hospitals that I know hospitals will be open to do, because investigators, at least in academic medical centers like ours, everybody is open to help with validation and write papers, which is good for the company as well. So I think it would be important to have these preferred terms for the first client, which sometimes, and I've seen it with the startups that I have helped, we don't think about it, but maybe the board can also say, okay, what about these preferred terms for the first client? Just give us some incentives from the buyer side to include this new technology, to co-develop, and overall to publish, the findings, and then work a little bit towards finally getting to purchase that innovation. And then that will open doors to many things, because our hospital, for example, we are a flagship hospital here mostly in Catalonia, but also in Spain. So this is a public system, right? So everything that we do and we implement, the whole system will see it. So if we have validated with one of the startups, even if we have preferred pricing, then it's very easy to spread and to gain a second and third and a fourth client. So just think on that process from the startup point. From the investor side, don't be too pushy, I mean, of course, be pushy on the first client, but help a little bit your startups to get there.
And I know you have experience on both sides. You mentioned that in a public system, that information can disseminate more rapidly, maybe. Does this game change when it's a private system that we're working with? What would you do differently?
Well, with the public system, the problem is very slow, very, very slow. And the purchasing process is very bureaucratic. So maybe in the private system, is faster and is easier because the decision-making of purchasing can be more streamlined. So you either go into the private system and you work with one hospital. Well, if you're with a hospital, with a partner system like MGB in Boston, then you probably can have access to 7 hospitals or something like that. But most often, you have only one institution, so you either do a good deal with one institution and it's faster, but going to the public system, it can be slower, but then you can actually spread a little bit further. That's how I see it.
Makes sense.
That's my experience.
I appreciate it. And I know we could talk to you about your experience in the hospitals for hours, but one thread I want to pick up on, Jose Pedro, with the last few minutes here is what we're going to be implementing in the future. And you were implementing big data, AI, before it was the cool thing of the year, years ago. I want to talk about what you're seeing in the AI, generative AI space, and when you're looking at the health technology opportunity broadly, what should companies be thinking about? What should they know with your AI expertise? How can they position themselves to have a real impact in the hospital systems of today and tomorrow?
I think we are in unprecedented moment in AI. It's an inflection point because the whole way everybody was doing AI, myself included, for 10, 15 years, just came to an end. And what I think is that startups and companies that are relying their business models on this old traditional way of building algorithms and selling that are at an existential risk at this time. And the reason being is that these large language models that most consumers see as ChatGPT are the most powerful technology I've seen. It evolves at an exponential rate. So, in 6 months, it has evolved more than any other technology in 12 years. And what that means as well is that if you have a company that's relying on a certain algorithm that, is, for instance, predicting a long nodule in a CT scan, and that's their business model, the thing is that these large language models are multimodal. So they will be able not only to see that image, but correlate that image with the clinical notes, with the vital signs, with the lab results, with the pathology reports. And that is a huge advantage when compared with your product. Mm-hmm. Because the startups and companies that start building their tech stack on top of this, first, they will have much more power in terms of the way they can predict events. And secondly, they will be able to absorb a lot of more data points, different data points that are really key for a doctor's decision-making process, because a doctor does not decide if a patient has a certain tumor or not just based on a single point. Mm-hmm. It decides based on several. So I think that we really need to look at what this technology is able to do. And just to give you an example, we are seeing that, for instance, these language models, and Google is doing a lot of great work there, can find tuberculosis in an X-ray without ever being trained in X-rays for tuberculosis, traditional process. Like, you show them an X-ray, and the model says tuberculosis is there, and it explains why.
Explain why that's possible now, though, because like you're saying, that traditional way would be, you show it a bunch of pictures of a dog, it learns what a dog looks like, and now it knows that this is a dog. It classifies it. Yeah. What's happening now, like you're saying, is this is able to go well beyond that. And so if you have one of those traditional models, how do you future-proof your business against what's happening now?
You need to pivot fast, because really, if I was investing or if I was in one of those companies, you need to pivot fast, because this is taking over. Mm-hmm. This is you cannot compete with something that first has learned with the entire knowledge of the world, and when applied to healthcare has been fine-tuned to healthcare. That's true. But the traditional way of doing things is coming to an end. I was talking to a company in Boston whose business model is classifying medical images. So they crowdsource, they pay doctors all around the world to classify medical images. And it has been their business model for years. Now, the thing is, these models now can automatically classify their own images by reading, image reports. They don't need a doctor anymore to do that dog, not dog thing. So their business model is at risk.
Makes sense. And for our last moment here, Lina, I'll pass it to you as we have Jose thinking very critically and both optimistically and a bit, carefully about the future of AI in your hospital right now. What would be your perspective in response to that as you're evaluating the landscape of large language models and generative AI? How are the leaders in your system thinking about it, and any closing thoughts on how hospital leaders may be looking at the future of technologies like AI?
It's a little bit intimidating from the inside, because we need to do a lot of education on the concept of these language models, on the concept of how actually you're going to implement it. And it's going so fast. And I think for us, implementing it, it's a little bit too slow inside. And I think that's a big challenge that we are having right now, is like, okay, we need to pick a pace, we need to do it. But inside, we still have scheduling in Excel sheets, you know? It's like,
True.
how are we going to go? We can't, I mean, we do the most humanly possible to go as fast, but it's really tough. So I think that we need to identify ways to educate fast our people and prepare them in small teams and do small implementations that can then spread around transversally. But that is a difficult task that we have at hand now. So we'll see. We're there.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we will see for sure. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. That'll conclude this morning's keynote. Looking forward to a great day 3. If you have questions for these two, we'll be coming off stage now. See you for the rest of the day of the panels, of the presentations, partnering meetings, and tonight's fireside chat. Thank you.